Yes, sir.
Yeah, you can start your presentation.
Okay,
Our
sir.
chairperson is Dr. Perumal sir. He's a neurosurgeon. Dr. Mithun?
Sir,
Good morning, everybody. This free paper session lasts from 8 to 9:30. Each presenter will have 8 minutes time and 2 minutes discussion. Please stick on to your time strictly. Thank you.
Dr. Mithun?
yes, sir.
Yeah.
But one has got nine papers are there. No, one has dropped out. One has dropped out. Number two has dropped out. Number two has dropped out. Okay, has dropped out.
Sir, shall we start, sir?
Yeah, you can start.
Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to discuss about cranial nerve injuries in mild to moderate traumatic brain injuries. I'm Dr. Midun. I am doing this under the guidance of Dr. Satyavara Prasad, Professor and HOD, and Dr. Vijay Shekhar, Associate Professor in the Department of Neurosurgery, Andhra Medical College, Visakhapatnam. When coming to introduction, among the craniocerebral trauma, cranial nerve injuries occupy significant amount of morbidity, which is incidence of 2 to 23%, which is reported in the various literature. When coming to aims and objectives of the study, this is to study the incidence of cranial nerve injury in mild traumatic brain injury patients and the recovery, incidence among different age groups, gender-wise distribution, and mechanism of injury, associated factors like protective measures like wearing helmet, alcohol consumption in case of motor vehicle accidents, and the recovery of the function over a period of time. And coming to materials and methods, this is a prospective study studied from September 2019 to November 2020. The inclusion criteria is all the patients presented with cranial nerve injuries after head trauma with GCS more than 9. That is, we have included, we have taken 645 patients, and we studied how many presented with cranial nerve injuries. And the exclusion criteria was severe traumatic brain injury, GCS less than 8. And from CT scans, we have differentiated into three types. That is normal CT scan and patients with only skull base fractures and other injuries. And the follow-up was done at the month, at first month, third month, and patients were followed up to 6 months and 1 year. Among all the patients, we have found 70 patients with cranial nerve injuries following mild traumatic brain injuries. And the age, when coming to demographics, the most common age group with cranial nerve injuries was 21 to 30 years, and the median was 33 years. And we saw a male preponderance, that is 84% of the patients were males and 16% were females. And the most common mode of injury was motor vehicle accidents. That is, it attributes to 81% of the patients with cranial nerve injuries. And the most cases were in mild traumatic brain injury. The GCS was 14 to 15 in 58% of the patients, and moderate in 41% of the patients. And in our series, we found the facial nerve was the most commonly affected single cranial nerve. We saw 30 out of the 70 patients, 32 patients were presented with facial nerve injury, followed by optic nerve and olfactory and oculomotor with the same incidence. And individually, trochlear nerve was the least affected, and the lower cranial nerves were the never affected. When coming to multiple cranial nerve involvement, the most common association was seen with third, fourth, and sixth cranial nerves. There is four patients presented with these three, and the next common multiple cranial nerve involvement was along with these three, second nerve was involved. When coming to recovery, when we see here, the patients without any lesion, that is without any fracture or any parenchymal findings, the recovery was significant in this type of in this group of patients. And patients with skull base fractures were the most affected with cranial nerve injuries, and they had partial recovery. And no recovery was seen in 10 patients. In other findings, it was equivocal. So when coming to discussion, we have compared our study with two other studies. One is with the Patel et al. And AF Coelho. Patel et al. They did a study in Apollo Hospitals, Chennai, and Coelho from Spain. In their studies, they have studied 100 patients with consecutive uh, with cranial injuries, and Coelho studied 49 patients. In them, the single cranial nerve the most common cranial nerve involvement was for Patel was facial nerve injury, same as our series, and in Coelho, olfactory nerve was the most common affected. And the multiple cranial nerve associations in our series was third, fourth, and sixth. In Patel et al., it was second, third, fourth, and sixth. In Coelho, the most common cranial association was seventh and eighth. When coming to conclusion, the incidence which we have noted in mild to moderate traumatic brain injuries with cranial nerve injuries is 4.25%, and motor vehicle accidents was the most common cause of injury. In our series, facial nerve was the most common affected, followed by optic nerve, and with similar incidence with oculomotor and olfactory. In contrast, trigeminal nerve was the least affected, and lower cranial nerves were never affected. And we can say that patients with skull-base fractures had the most cranial nerve injuries, and simple measures like wearing helmet and not driving while drunk will prevent most of the cranial nerve injuries. And these are the reference which I have taken from Patel and from Dr. Patel and Dr. Kahlo.
Dr. Mithun,
Yes, sir.
Thank
presentation.
you, Dr. Midun. I have one question. In your study, the facial nerve palsies are the commonest. Okay, most of these facial nerve palsies occur late, second day, third, fourth day, like that.
Yes, sir.
Do you have any criteria clinically, CT wise or MRI wise, to predict the possibility of a facial nerve palsy the third day?
So, with skull-base fractures, that is mostly petrosal petrosal part of the temporal bone. These patients usually presented third day or fourth day, sir. So we have most of the patients had subtle facial nerve palsy, sir.
Dr. Mithun,
Yes, sir.
one more question. As per most of the literature or any study, olfactory nerve is the most common nerve.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Other studies also showed some studies showed olfactory, some studies showed facial nerve, but most of the literature shows olfactory nerve is the most affected, sir.
How do you assess olfactory nerve in your moderate injury patient who are
Moderate injury we have assessed with if there is any CSF rhinorrhea.
CSF nerve is I know when
CSF rhinorrhea, and we have seen for CT findings like any cribriform plate injuries, sir.
no, not radiological.
Clinically, in moderate injuries, we have waited for them to recover and tested for olfactory nerve, sir.
Okay. What is your grading for mild head injury, moderate head injury? How do you grade them?
I have graded it according to Glasgow Coma scale, sir.
How do you quantify them into mild category and moderate category?
Yes, sir.
How? What is your cutoff?
Yes, sir. According to Glasgow Coma scale,
Yeah.
14 to 15 the GCS is mild, sir.
Actually, 13, 14, 15. You can take 13 also into mild category.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's why actually I want to. Actually, I think this is your thesis, right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. You should make that mild, moderate, severe. Severe less than 8 is severe.
Less than 8 is
9
severe.
9 to 12 is moderate. 13
is
14 is mild.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Any more questions? Open for discussion. We have 2 minutes time. Okay. Thank you, Mithun.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Dr. Raman.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Raman.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. You can start your presentation.
Sir.
You can start.
Sir. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Raman Kumar. I'm a second year resident in the neurosurgery department, Mamta Medical College and Hospital. The paper which I'll be presenting today is the surgical management of malignant middle cerebral artery infarction, surgical decompression. It's a 1 year institutional experience done at the Mamta Hospital only. So, little introduction about the study. It's a malignant middle cerebral artery infarction is a devastating condition with up to 80% of the mortality in conservatively treated patients. The pathophysiology of the stroke is characterized by a large core of severe ischemia and only a relatively small rim of penumbra. Here in our study, we presented series of patients with the development of infarction of more than 50% of the territory of the middle cerebral artery. Decompressive hemicraniotomy as an appropriate treatment for the malignant middle cerebral artery infarction is still a controversial issue. This study is aimed to determine the survival rate and the functional outcome and the factors associated with these in patients with the malignant MCA infarction. The most serious condition involving the large territory of the middle cerebral artery is termed the malignant cerebral artery infarction. The early severe neurological symptoms like hemiparesis, gaze deviation, higher cortical signs, followed by headache, vomiting, papilledema, and reduced consciousness may predict the deleterious course. So coming to the aims and objective, the goal of the study is to correlate the current institutional practices with the available evidence and analyze the outcome of the surgical management in a massive MCA infarct. The surgical outcome is analyzed by using the Glasgow Outcome Scale, Modified Rankin Scoring System, and the Glasgow Coma Scale and Functional Outcome Scores. Inclusion criteria included massive middle cerebral artery strokes, age less than 80 years, midline shift may or may not be present, worsening GCS, and CT infarcts volume more than 50% of the MCA distribution, unilateral papillary changes, and early coma with intact brainstem. It's not taken as a contraindication. Exclusion criteria included the age more than 80 years and the bilateral fixed pupils and absent brainstem reflexes. So the decompression hemicraniotomy was done in all the cases and the bone flap was kept subcutaneously per abdomen. Large bone flap was taken nearly 12 into 15 centimeters and up to 90% of the cases the dura mater was opened. So material and method, it's a retrospective outcome analysis. 14 cases were operated at Mamta Medical College and Super Specialty Hospital from December 2019 to November 2020. All the patients, they were admitted to the neurosurgery ICU and the decompressive craniotomy was done in all the patients and the bone flap was kept subcutaneously per abdomen. All the patients had undergone neurological examination before surgery. In all the patients, clinical and radiological investigations were done, including the CT, MRI, complete hematological profiling, cardiology workup like ECG, echo, neck Doppler, and CT angiography. 14 patients were included in this study, and all the patients had undergone neurological examination at the time of the examination and 3 days after the surgery and after the discharge. GCS was analyzed on the third post-op day and at the time of discharge. Glasgow Outcome Scale was analyzed at the time of the follow-up after the 3 months, and the modified Rankin score was analyzed at the time of the admission, discharge, and at the follow-up after 3 months. So the general data of the 14 patients admitted with the malignant middle cerebral artery infarction is number of cases taken was 14, male to female ratio was 8 to 6, and age limit was from 45 to 67 years. GCS was from 6 to 10, and the modified Rankin score was 2 to 5. So the medical morbidity and the timing of the surgery was taken into the consideration. 8 patients out of the 14 had a hypertension, 6 out of 14 had a diabetes, 2 out of the 14 had a coagulopathy, and the ischemic heart disease was present in the 3 out of the 14 cases. For the timing of the surgery, 9 patients, in the 9 patients, the surgery was done within the 24 hours of ictus, and then the 5 patients after the 24 hours of ictus. So the clinical finding and the functional outcome, which came out to be the mean operative time was 105 minutes, nearly 1 hour and 45 minutes. And the mortality within the 30 days of the surgery was seen in the 3 patients, and within 1 to 12 months of the surgery in one out of the 14 patients. Infection rate was 2 out of the 14. Rebleeding was seen in 1 case out of the 14. Average day of hospital stay of the patient was 19 plus minus 4 days. The The mean Glasgow outcome scale at the 3 months of the follow-up was 3.3 plus minus 1.71. Mean GCS at the time of discharge was 9.6 plus minus 1.44. The mean modified Rankin system at the discharge score was 3.3 plus minus 1.52. At the 3-month follow-up was 3.5 plus minus 1.54. Good functional outcome was seen in 64% of the patients. So, little discussion about the paper. The malignant MCA infarction is a life-threatening condition caused by the complete occlusion of the MCA alone, or maybe in combination with the AC occlusion also. Due to the fast developing irreversible morphological damage, cytotoxic edema occurs in the ischemic territory, causing the subsequent damage to the tight junctions, leading to the breakdown of the blood-brain barrier and the vasogenic brain edema. The progressive vasogenic edema exerts mechanical force on the surrounding tissue, structures leading to the midline shift and transtentorial herniation, and finally, brainstem compression and death. In our study, 14 patients were taken over a period of 1 year, and decompression hemicraniotomy was done in all the cases. In our study, most common age group were from 45 to 67 years, out of which 8 were male and 4 were female. Males were more commonly seen to be affected, as seen earlier in the several studies, common risk factors being obesity, smoking, alcohol consumption, diet, etc. Non-surgical therapies, including the positioning, hyperventilation, barbiturate coma, hypothermia, and brain dehydration therapies are not always effective, and sometimes elevating intracranial pressure is refractory to this medical therapy and leads to mortality. GCS is an independent predictor to the outcome following the malignant middle cerebral artery infarction, and the lower the GCS, poor the outcome. A small infarct is not an indication for the surgery, however, poor the GCS may be. During the surgery, just the removal of the bone flap reduced the ICP by 15%, and further reduction up to 70% occurred after opening the dura. This has already been proven in the several studies. All the cases shows radiographic improvement of the midline shift postoperatively. Many other researchers have published promising results of early decompressive hemicraniotomy for malignant MCA infarcts. Most of the studies stated that incidence of permanent major disability or the persistent vegetative state remains unchanged, but there is a marked reduction in the overall mortality rate and also an increased percentage of cases with a good functional outcomes. These results were supported by several published studies as well as by the 3 main European trials investigating malignant MCA infarction. Coming to the conclusion, the malignant MCA infarcts with a massive brain edema and uncal herniation remains a life-threatening condition that has to be instantaneously managed in order to reduce the mortality and morbidities. Early decompressive hemicraniotomies has proven to reduce the mortality rates and increase the probability of favorable functional outcomes. Preoperative clinical condition and the age of the patient, preoperative GCS score, and the early timing of the surgeries has led to the favorable clinical outcome. A study with a larger sample size and the longer follow-up is recommended for better confirmation of these facts. So this is the recently conducted 3 European studies which have studied compared the surgery with the medical management in case of the malignant MCA infarction. Decimal, Destiny, and the Hamlet. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raman Kumar. Nice presentation.
Thank you.
As there are no questions from the audience, I would like to ask one question. A technical detail. When you are opening the dura,
Yes, sir.
you are following the cruciate method of opening or opening the dura like a flap. And what is the difference in the infarct? It's a venous infarct at the 3rd day or 15th day.
So mostly we are opening like a flap only, sir. We are anteriorly retracting the dura, sir. And the major difference between the 3rd day and the 15th day is, sir, we found that the edema and the ICP was severely raised, sir, on the 3rd day and the 5th day, sir.
Yeah. Because when you open the dura in a cruciate manner, the
Yes,
dura abuts the bone margin. So the venous compression is much less. The venous edema, which is going to add to the already existing edema, will come down. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Next presentation, Dr. Shiva, SWIMS.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, sir. I'm Dr. Shivkumar from SWIM, sir. My presentation is varied presentation of schwannoma at a tertiary institute. And coming to the introduction, schwannoma is a benign tumor that originates from the Schwann cells of nerves, and schwannoma is first reported by Wetocke in 1910. And this tumor is associated with nerve sheath and adjacent to the parental nerve, but it is extrinsic to nerve fascicles, sir. And schwannomas are usually solitary and slow-growing benign neoplasms and are well encapsulated. And schwannomas can arise from any cranial or peripheral nerves and autonomic nerves that contain Schwann cells, and they are not seen from first and second cranial nerves. Objectives for my study the present study was done to know the incidence and presentations of non-vestibular schwannomas and the materials and methods. Retrospective study was done from a period of 2010 to 2020. Data was collected from
ఏం క్వశ్చన్స్ రావట్లేదు కదా బాక్స్లో ఏం క్వశ్చన్స్ ఏం రావట్లేదు
చూస్తాను సార్.
లేదు కదా
Data was collected from retrospectively from 2007 to 2020, who operated from our institute and whose biopsy came out as schwannoma. And results of my study were most common schwannomas are vestibular schwannomas constituting around 57.3%, and next common schwannomas are spinal schwannomas, which include 74 and constituting around 33%, and next most common non-vestibular cranial schwannomas are trigeminal schwannomas, which around 0.2%, and next other schwannomas are facial nerve schwannomas and vagal nerve schwannomas, hypoglossal nerve schwannomas, and sympathetic chain schwannomas, and peripheral nerve schwannomas. And this is the bar diagram showing the same result. And coming to the age distribution, most people coming with the schwannomas include from 30 to 40 years age group, constituting around 99 number, and other next common age group is 41 to 50 years. And sex distribution, most commonly females are affected more than the males, and by 1.13% to males. And these are the various presentations. And first presentation is a 28-year-old male patient presented with left-sided facial pain for 8 months, and headache and vomiting since 2 days. And an examination, he had a sensory deficit over the left half of face, and
టు ద ఎయిర్
investigations. Investigations, this is a heterogeneously enhanced region in the left CB angle system, which is extending through the tentorial hiatus into the middle cranial fossa, and with necrotic areas within, and with compression over the brainstem. And this is a sagittal image showing the same, which is extending into the middle cranial fossa. This patient is diagnosed as right-sided trigeminal schwannoma with brainstem and hydrocephalus. Later on, patient underwent initially EVD followed by definitive surgery through right suboccipital retromastoid and retrosigmoid craniectomy. And the next presentation is a 54-year female presented with hearing deficit over the right ear, and decreased taste sensation, and decreased taste sensation and numbness over the right half of face. On a clinical examination, patient had right-sided fifth nerve cranial palsy along with absent gag reflex and right-sided facial nerve palsy also.
ఉంటారు కదా
And this patient, this is the image showing the same. Here you can see the mixed intensity lesion with a component with compression over the brainstem. The lesion is locating over the cerebellar system, and this patient is diagnosed as right-sided CP angle lower cranial schwannoma, and patient underwent intraoperatively had a bradycardia, and patient underwent right retrosigmoid craniectomy and near total excision of schwannomas. And the next other patient is a 24-year young female came with complaints of headache for 2 months along with the decreased sensation over the right side and deviation of mouth towards left side since 2 months. On examination, patient had a cranial reflex absent on the right side and indirect cranial reflex also absent on the left side, sir. And the patient had a right-sided lower element type 3 Hausback cranial palsy along with right-sided sensory neural hearing loss. And this patient, on evaluation, patient had a contrast enhancing lesion which is getting over the right CP angle system, which is extending through the internal artery canal, and which can be traced towards the tympanic part of the facial nerve. And this is diagnosed as right-sided seventh nerve cranial schwannoma, and patient underwent initially right temporal craniotomy and removal of temporal part of the tumor, and later on retromastoid craniectomy and removal of the cerebral CP angle part. And next presentation is 39-year-old female patient present with a swelling over the left side of neck and pain for 1 year. And an examination, this patient had a mobile found swelling in the anterior triangle of the neck, and clinical examination, patient had wasting of the tongue also, sir. And the patient is diagnosed. Here the image is showing the uh, contrast enhancing part in the region of the left hypoglossal nerve, and patient underwent diagnosed with left hypoglossal schwannoma, and patient underwent excision of the tumor through high anterior cervical and retropharyngeal approach. And next case is 35-year-old female complaints of left side neck swelling over the left side of neck for 2 years, and which is progressive swelling. And examination, the patient had a painless smooth swelling which is deep to deep fascia, and smooth surface which is mobile, sir. And patient had clinically ptosis also. And patient diagnosed with left side vagal nerve schwannoma, sir. These are the images. This is the swelling which is clinically palpable, and this is the contrast enhancing lesion in the region of left vagal nerve, sir. And this is the intraoperative picture which is showing the well encapsulated smooth surface lesion, sir. And next patient is 50-year-old female patient swelling over the left supraclavicular region for 5 years, and patient had complaints of pain over the swelling and difficulty in raising arm over the shoulder, sir. And an examination, patient had a globular swelling of 10 to 8 centimeters in the left side of neck, extending from mandible to supraclavicular fossa, and left deltoid weakness was the patient had clinically ptosis, sir. And this is the image showing the large swelling in the left supraclavicular fossa. These are the images showing the mixed intensity region with cystic components in the region of left supraclavicular region. And this is the intraoperative patient diagnosed as C5 nerve root schwannoma extending into the posterior triangle, and patient underwent excision of the lesion, and the biopsy came out as schwannoma. And another case is 30-year-old female presented with swelling over the right forearm for 3 years duration. Patient had paresthesias and decrease in the hand grip since 3 months duration. Patient on examination, patient had a found swelling which is non-painful, which is mobile in the vertical direction, and there is no palpable thrill or bruise. On examination, investigations, patient had a contrast enhancing lesion in the region of ulnar nerve, and patient diagnosed as right-sided forearm peripheral nerve tumor, which is diagnosed as ulnar nerve tumor, and patient underwent excision of tumor. This is also a schwannoma, well encapsulated tumor. And another case is 17-year-old male patient complains of neck pain since 10 years duration, and paresthesias involving all 4 limbs, and difficulty in walking since 6 months. On examination, patient has spasticity in all limbs, and with exaggerated reflexes and bilateral plantar extensors. This is MRI images of the same patient, which is showing contrast enhancing region in the region of C2 to C3, which is located intradurally and extending through the spinal canal into the adjacent nerve roots. And this is the CT images of the same patient showing the widened neural foramen, which is suggestive of extending through the nerve along the nerve roots. And this patient is diagnosed as C2 C3 schwannoma, and this patient underwent C2 laminectomy and cross total excision of tumors. And coming to the discussion, schwannomas are benign, slow-growing encapsulated tumors of nerve sheath origin, found most commonly in the extremities and neck region. These are not seen along with the first and second cranial nerves. These are difficult to diagnose preoperatively, and FNAC won't provide adequate information. And this can be associated with NF1 and NF2 also. Most common age group is 20 to 50 years. 5% having onset in childhood and adolescence. In other studies also, extracranial schwannomas are most common age group is 30 to 40 years. In our study also, it is the most common age group which is involved. And on gross appearance, they are solitary, well circumscribed, and having smooth surface. And on microscopy, lesions can display 2 patterns: Antony A, which is high cellularity fibers, and Antony B, less cellular fibers with mixoid matrix. And immunohistochemistry can show S100 proteins. This is the compact fibers, which is Antony A, and loose fibers, which is Antony B. And conclusion: vestibular schwannomas are one of the most common and most common surgical and clinical presentation in neurosurgery. Non-vestibular schwannomas, except spinal schwannomas, are a rarity and present a diagnostic and surgical challenge. And clinical and radiological investigations are cornerstones for the diagnosis, and because of its rarity, surgical management and surgical skill hold a high importance.
Yeah, nice presentation, Shiva. Hello.
Thank you.
Yeah. The topic is open for questions.
Yes, sir.
50.
Shiva, how many cases are included here?
How many picks, sir?
How many patients included in this study? Total?
8, sir.
8. Okay. All are operated only and
All
biopsy
are
proven.
operated. All are operated and biopsy proven, sir.
Biopsy proven. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Shiva.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Varun? Dr. Varun, are you there?
Dr. Varun Jonnalagada, retrospective study of traumatic brain injury in pediatric age group, review of cases in tertiary hospital.
ల్యాప్టాప్ బెటర్ కదా, అది ఇది సేమే కదా.
అంటే షేర్ చేయాలి నాన్న స్క్రీన్.
ఇందులో షేర్ చేయొచ్చు ఈజీగా.
Dr. Varun, is there any problem? You can chat or you can call us. Yeah. Dr. Varun, make it full screen and you can.
రెండు పోయినా
Dr. Varun, you can introduce yourself and you can start your presentation. Varun. Hello.
You are seen.
Yeah, Arun.
Please go ahead. Share your screen. Yeah.
Audible, sir? Varun is not audible. Varun is not audible. Varun, can you please pick up the call? Varun, okay for you? Yeah. Okay. Oh, please recheck your connections. We'll go ahead with next presentation. Dr. Sriram is available?
Hello? Hello, sir. I'm audible, sir. I'm Dr.
Yeah. Sriram, yeah. Sriram, you can go ahead. Varun, please check your reconnection till then. Sriram, you can share your screen.
Sir, is it visible, sir?
Yes. Yeah, please introduce yourself and you can start your presentation.
Sir, I'm Dr. Sriram, sir. I'm from the Department of Neurosurgery, SWIMS, Tirupati. My guides are Dr. V.V. Ramesh Chandra, Dr. B.C.M. Prasad, sir. Today, I'm presenting our experiences of pineal region tumors, sir. Sir, pineal region tumors using 0.4 to 1% of all primary tumors of the central nervous system, 0.5 to 8% of the tumors. The pineal region tumors is a challenging surgical location in part because of the rarity of the pineal region neoplasms and close vicinity of the gland to the deep venous system and the mesencephalodiencephalic structures, sir. Pineal region tumors are classified mainly into 4 main categories: germ cell tumors, pineal cell tumors, glial cell tumors, and miscellaneous tumors. The incidence of germ cell tumors varies from 50 to 75% of the tumors in the pineal regions. Pineal region tumors are classified as germ cell tumors, pineal parenchymal tumors. Among the germ cell tumors, germinomas constitute around 65% of the germ cell tumors. Germ cell tumors are classified as germinomas, germinoma with syncytial trophoblastic component, non-germinomatous germ cell tumors, and teratomas. Whereas penile parenchymal tumors are pineocytoma, pineoblastoma, penile parenchymal tumor of intermediate differentiation, and papillary tumor. CSF markers can be used to diagnose non-germ cell tumors even without tissue confirmation, therefore avoiding surgery at presentation and its associated complications. Markers can also be used to reflect prognosis, evaluate response to treatment, and monitor disease recurrence. In non-secreting penile region tumors, however, tissue diagnosis is always required to guide further management. Advancements in the neuroendoscopy have led to the ability to simultaneously treat hydrocephalus and obtain tissue diagnosis, thereby obviating the need for more invasive and morbid procedures. Surgical approaches may be divided into anterior and posterior. Posterior approaches are further divided into supratentorial and infratentorial. The most appropriate approach to a particular lesion depends primarily on the extent of tumor, that is the lateral, rostral, caudal, anterior-posterior extension of the tumor, tumor's relation to the vein of the Allen venous complex, the suspected histopathology and vascularity of the lesion, and surgeon's experience with each approach. Aims and objectives. In the present study, the aims are to study the different aspects of penile region tumors regarding clinical features, location, surgical approaches, histology, and outcomes. Retrospectively, we have analyzed 21 patients operated from 2015 to 2020. Data was obtained from the files of the patient. All the patients underwent preoperative complete general and neurological examination, MRI of the brain with and with contrast, and postoperative CT scan of the brain. Postoperatively, all the patients had CT scan of the brain. Some patients had also follow-up MRI of the brain with the contrast. The clinical features, diagnostic approach, operative approach, and postoperative complications and outcomes of the patients were analyzed. Penile region tumors are rare and constitute only up to 0.4 to 1% of the primary tumors of the central nervous system. And it constitutes around 2.5 to 8.5% of the pediatric intracranial tumors. In the present study, the mean age of presentation is 31.33 years. Age range is 13 to 52 years, and 10% of the patients were female and 10% were males. This is the sex distribution showing 11 are female, 11 are male, and 10 patients are female. Clinical presentation, tumors in the penile region, regardless of the histology, generally become symptomatic by three mechanisms. One is increased intracranial pressure from hydrocephalus, direct cerebellar or brainstem compression, and endocrine dysfunction. And headache is the most common presentation, sir. In the present study, presenting complaints, headache constituted 19 patients presented with headache. 11 patients had vomiting, 6 patients presented with diplopia, 3 patients had nystagmus, and 1 patient had seizure episode. Radiologically, hydrocephalus was present in 10 patients, and clinically, papilledema on fundus examination is seen in 12 patients. Of these patients, 3 patients underwent ventricular peritoneal shunt before definitive surgery for hydrocephalus, and 5 patients underwent external ventricular drainage. This is a 43-year-old male underwent VP shunt outside, presented with raised intracranial tension for 3 months. Patient underwent suboccipital craniotomy and near total excision of penile region tumor by cross approach. Patient biopsy came as a penile parenchymal tumor, and patient underwent radiotherapy. Hello? Hello? Hello, sir? Hello, sir. I'm audible, sir.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are audible. Yes,
sir, 14-year-old male presented with raised ICP. He underwent ETV and biopsy, sir. Biopsy was suggestive of patient was advised radiotherapy, but patient discontinued radiotherapy and presented with raised ICP and underwent VP shunt, sir. This is the post-op shunt scan feature showing post-op shunt in situ. Debulking of the tumor was done, and the patient was referred to radiotherapy, sir. And the patient diagnosis came as pineocytoma. This is a 14-year-old male presented with raised ICP for 3 days. Patient was suspected to have mixed germ cell tumor, and investigations and patient serum markers and CSF markers were sent, and these were found to be elevated. for which medical oncology consultation was taken, and patient was started on BP chemotherapy, and patient is responding to chemotherapy. These are the preoperative investigations suggestive of raised alpha fetoprotein and elevated LDH. Surgery was avoided in this patient because of the elevated serum markers and CSF markers, and the patient was directly started on chemotherapy. This is another patient, 35-year-old female, presented with raised ICP and diplopia for 3 months. Patient underwent endoscopic third ventriculostomy with biopsy of the lesion. Biopsy was suggestive of papillary tumor of the pineal region, WHO grade 2, and the patient was started on as referred to radiotherapy for further management. This is another patient, 52-year-old female presented with raised ICP. She underwent subtentorial approach and excision of meningioma. These are the post-operative images showing the complete removal of meningiomas. Pre-op and post-operative images suggestive of removal of meningioma. This is an interesting case, 31-year-old female with complaints of headache for 1 year associated with reeling sensation. Our radiological imaging was suggestive of pineal cystic lesion. Patient was followed serially for every year. These are the 3 images showing pineal cystic lesion without increase in size. Patient was being managed conservatively and being followed up every year. My results, 5 patients underwent EVD insertion. 3 patients underwent hydrocephalus as CSF diversion procedures. 5 patients underwent ETV with biopsy. 11 patients underwent supracerebellar infratentorial approach, and 3 patients underwent pareto-occipital approach. And among these histopathology reports, pineal intermediate parenchymal tumor is the predominant tissue diagnosis at our institute. Operative approach, 11 patients underwent supracerebellar infratentorial approaches, 3 patients underwent pareto-occipital approach, 5 patients underwent ETV with biopsy, patients underwent VP shunt for CSF, and 3 patients underwent EVD, external ventricular drainage placement. Coming to the morbidity, 2 patients had wound infections. 1 patient developed post-operatively worsening of eye symptoms with nystagmus and Peyronie's syndrome. 2 patients succumbed to post-operative ventilatory associated pneumonia, and 1 patient has been on prolonged ventilator support. Histopathology, coming to the histopathology, as per the literature, germ cell tumors are most common, but our institute pineal parenchymal intermediate tumors have been the predominant histopathology, followed by meningioma and the germinoma, followed by pineocytoma, pineoblastoma, and pineal cyst and papillary pineal tumors. Conclusion, sir. Majority of the pineal tumors can be approached either from infratentorial supracerebellar approach or pareto-occipital transtentorial approach with excellent exposure with minimal complications, sir. And ETV should be the first line of treatment for obstructive hydrocephalus in patients with tumors in the pineal regions. CSF markers can be used to diagnose non-germ cell tumors even without tissue confirmation, and surgery can be avoided as the surgery has no significant role in case of non-germ cell tumors. And pineal parenchymal tumor is the most common histological diagnosis in the present studies. These are my conclusion. This is my conclusion, sir, and these are my references.
Thank you, Sriram. So you are running out of time. We'll go ahead with next presentation. Dr. Varun?
Am I audible, sir, now?
Yeah, Arun. Yeah, absolutely fine. Varun, please screen your screen and start. Introduce yourself and start.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to present a topic on retrospective study of traumatic brain injuries in pediatric age group.
Varun, can you please make your screen full screen? Yeah, good.
This is a review of cases in tertiary hospital under the guidance of Dr. Malleshwar Rao Garu, Dr. Jagdish Babu Garu, Dr. Vimala, Mamta Medical College and Super Specialty Hospital, Khammam. Introduction: traumatic brain injury is an insult to the brain, not of degenerative or congenital nature, but caused by an external physical force that may produce a diminished or altered state of consciousness, which results in impairment of cognitive abilities or physical functioning. Profound disturbances of cognitive, emotional, and behavior functioning after traumatic brain injury may produce permanent impairment that results in a partial or total functional disability and psychosocial malengagement. Traumatic brain injury is the leading cause of death and disability in the children. In India, children less than 15 years constitute 35% of the total population and contribute to 20 to 30% of all head injuries. Traumatic brain injuries in children result in a range of traumatic injuries to the skull, and brain that are comparable to those in adults, but differ in both pathophysiology and management. It ranges from birth-related injury to adolescent trauma. About 70 to 80% of the accidental deaths in pediatric age group results directly from the central nervous system lesion. Most of the road traffic accidents are in fact pedestrians, and majority of them are children. Materials and methods. The present study was carried out in Mamta Medical College and Hospital, Khammam, for the duration of 2 years to evaluate the details of traumatic brain injury in pediatric age group. 56 patients were included in this with an age group of from 6 months to 15 years. On the basis of presenting symptoms, signs and radiological features, and mode of injury and executed treatment plan with outcome, patients were analyzed into different groups. In the present study, management of the pediatric traumatic brain injury was done according to the protocols and ranges from conservative management to surgical modality of treatment. Manual monitoring of ICP, therapeutic uses of sedatives, analgesics, and neuromuscular blockage with hyperventilation, and use of anticonvulsants, hyperosmolar therapy like use of intravenous mannitol and hypertonic saline to control intracranial pressure in children with severe traumatic brain injury was used. CSF drainage, decompressive craniotomy, evaluation of hematomas, elevation of depressed fractures are the surgical procedures which are followed. And the results, male to female ratio in our study is 1:1:1.3 with predisposition of age group between 7 to 10 years of the most common age group. Motor vehicle accident was the most common cause in 56% of the patients, and accident fall at home in 28% of the patients. Most common presenting symptom was vomiting and headache in 60% of the patients. Unconscious patients present with unconsciousness in 30%. 25% of the patients presented with seizure. Common presenting GCS is of moderate severity between 9 to 12. Ear bleed and nasal bleed were present in 38% of the patients. Elder children presented with SDH and SEH in 40% of them, while EDH was commonly presenting feature in 29% of the patients, followed by depressed fractures. Conservative management was given to 60%, 34 patients of all, out of all, and surgical intervention was required to remain. Decompressive craniectomy was required in only 28% of the cases. Amongst EDH, fracture associated with EDH, which is small in size, was managed conservatively, and those causing mass effects were operated. 2 patients were required CSF diversion procedures. The overall mortality in our study is 9%. Seizure prophylaxis was given to 80% of children post-discharge. Discussion in India, children between 1 to 15 years constitute 35% of the total population. Head injury in infancy and childhood has been documented as the single most common cause of death. Moreover, the modes of injury, the mechanisms of damage, and the management of specific problems differ significantly between the adult and pediatric populations. Globally, traumatic brain injury is a burning issue with an annual incidence of 200 per 1 lakh and mortality of 20 per 1 lakh per year. While assessing children with traumatic brain injury, depth and the duration of impaired consciousness, presence of diffuse cerebral edema, cerebral hypoperfusion, brain infarction, and degrees of parenchymal injury are the determinants of the poor outcome. Sambasivan et al. Has reported an equal incidence of males and females in his series of pediatric head injury. Chiariti et al. Hypothesized that incidence of traumatic brain injury is higher in boys, which might be due to the large head circumference, more muscular and physical activities in comparison to the girls. While in our study, girls outnumbered the boys in the incidence. Several literature reported fall from height as the most common cause of traumatic brain injury, followed by RTA in children. However, Osmond et al. Found a higher incidence of RTA while reviewing severe pediatric traumatic brain injury for a period of 4 years. We found that RTA was the most common mode of traumatic brain injury in the pediatric population. Within the teenage passion for bicycling and bike ridings and vulnerability for physical assault might be the higher possible factors contributing to the higher incidence of RTA. Children with traumatic brain injury due to RTA, in fact, are pedestrians, as observed in the several other studies. In a study, RTA being most common cause in children beyond 5 years of age, the maximum age group is between 10 to 12 years, which is 59%, out of which 59% were pedestrians. Fall of heavy objects can also contribute to some extent, as reported by Sambasivan et al. Biochemical and biomechanical consequences of isolated brief LOC without any other symptoms or signs of traumatic brain injury are somehow less in comparison to documented LOC with symptoms while assessing the outcome of traumatic head injury in children. Vomiting per se in children is a non-specific symptom. Many children with vomiting or as presenting symptom do not have any intracranial injury, but as a history of vomiting followed trauma to head injury increases the subsequent risks. We found that vomiting and headache are the commonest presenting symptom followed by LOC similar to other studies. Extradural hematoma occurs from focal impact injuries, whereas subdural hematoma almost always results from angular deceleration injuries of the head. In our study, extradural hematoma was the most common CT scan finding, followed by contusions, whereas Mahapatra reports contusion as the most common finding in pediatric head injuries. A similar observation has also been reported by Bhargava et al. Various sequels can be seen following traumatic brain injury in children. Example, while early sequences include transient cortical blindness, seizures, cranial nerve palsy, diabetes, SIDH, and hemiparesis, and late sequels may include post-traumatic epilepsy, post-traumatic aneurysms, meningitis, hydrocephalus, memory loss, and disabilities. In our study, conservative management far exceeds craniotomies. In our series, we achieved a good recovery in 91% of the patients with an overall mortality of 9%, similar to many other Indian studies. The seizure was seen in 25% of the patient. As similar as a smaller incidence has been reported by the others. We found that the highest mortality in children with the diffuse axonal injury, owing to the severity of the injury, and mortality in our study is attributable to the late arrival to our institute, unpreparedness for the surgery at the time. Last but not least, the low socioeconomic status. Conclusion: traumatic brain injury in children generally carries a good outcome if referred to an pediatric neurotrauma center, and subsequently managed on an individual basis to treat the primary lesion with the objective to prevent the ongoing biomechanical, physiological, and pathological consequences owing to traumatic brain injuries. Severe head injury. Most of these injuries are preventable in infancy and childhood by ensuring proper vigilance, tender care by the parents and the caretaker, and in adolescence by pursuing timely investigations to establish intracranial pathology and early surgical intervention can lead to good outcomes. Even within the immature brain, there seems to be age-dependent responses following the traumatic brain injury in children. The optimal care for an infant or child with traumatic brain injury requires a multidisciplinary management. After the initial evaluation, prompt neuroimaging with diagnosis, multimodal monitoring, and titrated management of intracranial pressure are necessary to minimize the pathophysiological damage to the developing brain.
Dr. Varun, this is a good presentation and it is interesting. Okay, the subject is open for discussion. Varun, hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, what is the lowest age which you operated in your study?
7 years. Sir.
11 years.
Sorry?
7 years. 7 years. Okay. What is the incidence of head injury in less than 1 year age group? 1 year.
Sir, we actually only included inclusion criteria for 5 years.
5 to 12 years. 12. Okay. And do you do ICP monitoring in your institute?
No, we don't have any ICP monitors.
Okay. Thank you, Varun.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next, Dr. Anurag Sinha.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, please share your screen.
Right. So is it visible?
Yeah.
Good morning, sir. The topic for today's presentation is rise in the incidence of traumatic brain injury due to assault in COVID-19 era at a tertiary care government hospital. Coming on to the introduction, the recent SARS-CoV-2 pandemic has been posing tough challenges not only in the field of patient care, but has also affected the people on personal, social, and professional fronts. There has been a rise in the cases of assault, both social and domestic, leading to traumatic brain injury in the COVID era as compared to the pre-COVID times. Coming on to the material and methods, we reviewed the incidence of traumatic brain injury due to assault between 1st of April 2020 and 1st September 2020, admitted from casualty in the Department of Neurosurgery at Government General Hospital, Kakinada, and compared this with the incidence in the last 5 months. All the patients received a thorough clinical evaluation and radiological assessment in the form of CT scans of the brain and whole spine. The demographic data in the form of socio-economic indexing was used, modified Kuppuswamy scale. It was recorded for each case. Coming on to the observations and results, 75 patients, out of which 43 were males and 32 were females, with suspected traumatic brain injury due to assault, were seen during this period of 5 months, between April 2020 to September 2020, considered as COVID era in our study, in comparison with a mere 30 cases, 22 males and 8 females, recorded in the previous 5 months, November 2019 to April 2020, considered as pre-COVID era. This equates to a 150% increase in the cases of traumatic brain injury due to assault. Coming on to the gender distribution, the following chart shows that a greater fraction of females suffered traumatic brain injury due to assault in the COVID era as compared to the pre-COVID times. You can see the right bar graph is showing a higher incidence as compared to the left one. Moving on to the age distribution, the most common age group encountered in the assault cases in the COVID time was between 25 to 45 years, whereas it was below 25 years of age group in the pre-COVID times. In this table, in the pre-COVID times, the below 25 years population was 17, 25 to 45 years population affected was 8, and more than 45 years were 5 patients. In the COVID times, less than 25 years were 29, in the 25 to 45 years group were 35, and more than 45 years were only 11 patients. The socio-economic status. The following was the distribution of the socio-economic status as per the modified Kuppuswamy scale. In the pre-COVID times, the lower socio-economic group patients were 15, upper lower were 12, in the lower middle there were 3, and no patients in the upper middle and upper group. In the COVID times, the lower Kuppuswamy group involved 55 patients, upper lower had 14 patients, lower middle had 6, and no patients from the upper middle and upper groups. Moving on to the cause of violence, the most common reason of assault in the pre-COVID era was due to arguments in community or workplace as per the history, whereas in the COVID era, domestic violence was the most common cause. Out of the 30 patients in the pre-COVID times, 24 had some arguments or fights at the workplace or in the community gatherings, and only 6 had domestic violence. In COVID era, about 32 patients had workplace arguments, and 43 patients had suffered injury due to arguments at home. Moving on to the severity of injury, most of the assault traumatic brain injury cases were mild in severity, both in pre-COVID times and in COVID era. And the following table shows the distribution. As can be seen, a majority of cases in both the groups were in the mild category of severity. The radiological findings, the CT head findings in the patients were as follows. In the pre-COVID times, about 64% patients had SDH in the scan, 40% had contusion, 36% showed EDH also, 32% showed traumatic SAH, and 48% had skull fractures. In the COVID times, about 47% showed SDH, 36% showed contusion, 31% showed EDH, 17% also had traumatic SAH, and 60% had skull fractures. This data shows that there were not only a single type of injury, but like multiple injuries were involved in the scans. Coming on to the discussion, the increase in the incidence seen at our institution reflects a rise in traumatic brain injury due to assault in the COVID era. A vast majority of these cases represent an increase in the trend of domestic violence and a relative decline in assault due to arguments in community gatherings or at workplace, probably as a result of enforcement of strict lockdowns and social distancing measures. These figures are likely to be underrepresented due to public avoidance of hospitals at this time. The ongoing crisis and the social distancing protocols to control it may have had an impact on the psychosocial health of the people due to financial losses, socio-economic deprivation, family arguments, etc., which may have been exacerbated as a result of the stresses imposed by quarantine measures. A closer relationship exists between violence, mental health, substance misuse, and socioeconomic circumstances, and the issue of abuser head trauma may turn into a silent second pandemic, apart from COVID, if not addressed properly. These were some of the references I used. Thank you.
Dr. Sinha, it's a nice presentation. It's interesting. Yeah. This subject is open for discussion. Dr. Sinha,
Sir.
it is interesting to hear that there is 150% increase in assault cases during lockdown.
Sir.
What could be the reason? What could be?
So probably, sir, because there was strict lockdown being imposed, quarantine was being done. Most of the people were working from home at that time, sir. So probably, and many had lost their profession and jobs also. So maybe because of mental stress and so these psychosocial issues, the incidents would have increased, sir.
One
Arguments
more
at
thing is,
home.
one more thing is, as this COVID era, most of the hospitals are not allowed to admit. So probably, as you are the referral hospital, probably it could be one of the reasons. What could be the most common weapon or instrument during this violence? I mean, which resulted in EDH, SDH, you told?
Sir, what we had found, it was very variable, sir. Some were things, some were using brick, some had coconut, even because the domestic, like at home, people usually keep coconuts. Some of them like hit by coconut like that, and some had hit with the wall like that, sir.
Yeah, okay. How many cases were operative during this study?
Sir, in this we didn't consider operative cases because like all were had mild injury only as per the GCS.
Okay, nice. I mean, you mentioned one was severe head injury in your study. One case, something.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah.
That case, sir, came in a bad shape only, sir. So we got him.
So, nice presentation. Thank you, Sinha.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Kodali Sandhya, KIMS. Next presenter, Dr. Kodali.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, madam. Madam, you can start. You can share your screen and you can start your presentation.
Yes, sir. Is my screen visible, sir?
Yes, madam. Yes.
I'm Dr. Kodali Sandhya. I'm presenting about the clinical analysis and surgical management of spinal meningioma in a tertiary care center. So this era of spinal surgery began in 1887 in London when the first surgery was done by Dr. Victor Horsley. He removed the thoracic IDM in a 42-year-old and he termed it as a fibromyxoma. The term meningioma, which is in current usage now, was given by Harvey Cushing. And the first published intradural tumor was given by Dr. Charles in 1925. This is the picture of the first tumor which was removed by Dr. Victor Horsley. These spinal meningiomas arise from the arachnoid capsules, and they are about 12 to 15% of all the meningiomas. 35 to 40% of them are intradural extramedullary lesions. About 4.5 to 13% of them have the extradural growth, and they're generally slow-growing, benign. Thoracic spine is the most common location. Exposure to ionizing radiation in the pediatric and early agehood has been as a proven risk factor. Neurofibromatosis type 2 patients also have a high risk of Coming to the extramedullary lesions, meningioma, nerve sheath tumors like neurofibroma, schwannoma, leptomeningeal metastasis, and medulloblastoma are the commonest lesions. In my study, we have evaluated the clinical factors, surgical procedure, and post-operative outcome, and we have analyzed in 29 patients so far. It's a retrospective study done in a single tertiary care center wherein all patients with spinal meningioma from 2013 to 2020 have been included. We have about 29 patients and with a follow-up minimum of 1 month to ranging to maximum of 7 years. All the following details were noted for all the patients, including clinical condition, radiological imaging, pre-op general evaluation, surgical approach, prognosis, outcome, and follow-up. Coming to the symptomatology, weakness of limbs was the most common symptom. Localized pain, paresthesias in corresponding limbs, giddiness when there is a lesion in the upper cervical level, and bladder involvement we have seen in one patient, apart from the regular examination. These are pictures of MRI showing in different regions, cervical, dorsal, and lumbar, the classic dural tail sign of the meningioma, located anteriorly and posteriorly. Coming to the pre-op evaluation, we had the regular physical examination, neurological examination. CT cervical spine was done in suspected cases with calcification. X-rays to see for any increased erosion of pedicles. And urodynamic study was done on a patient with bladder involvement. With respect to the motor root, sensory root, and the dentated ligament, the lesions arising in the spinal column have been classified as anterior, anterolateral, posterolateral, and posterior. And 73% of them have a dural attachment on the lateral C. And depending on how much they occupy the spinal canal, they've been classified as less than 25% as stage 1, 25 to 50 as stage 2, 50 to 75 stage 3, and more than 75% at stage 4. In view of these varied classifications, there was a proposal of new radiological classification for spinal meningiomas by Dr. Ahmed et al. And this shows they have four types: type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, and subtypes again in that. Type 1 includes small anterolateral and small posterolateral, where for a posterolateral thing, hemilaminectomy or laminoplasty alone can be taken into consideration, and the anterolateral thing needs laminectomy, laminoplasty, plus or minus unilateral facetectomy. In type 2, these are the midline lesions, midline anterior, midline posterior, or the lateral lesions. They will require laminectomy, laminoplasty, plus or minus pedicle resection. In cervical region, anterolateral corpectomy might be required, and in thoracic region, costotransversectomy or thoracotomy might be required. And type 3 includes large anterolateral or posterolateral lesions which need laminectomy, laminoplasty, and duroplasty also will be required for extradural growth of paraspinal. For a paraspinal thing, transpedicular approach or extracavitary approach is also needed. Spinal stabilization will be required in all cases with the facet or pedicle resections. For spinal meningiomas with ventral attachment, posterolateral approach have been classically popularized. 30 to 40% of them will need a facet resection, and a pedicle in patients with pedicle resection will need invariably the curvilinear incision and exposure on unilateral side to for a lateral meningioma. In some patients of spinal meningiomas, minimally invasive surgery approach has also been done with a keyhole laminotomy on the lateral side of lesion. In our study, we have given vertical midline incision or curvilinear incisions, and a contralateral approach has been preferred, that is standing on the opposite side of the lesion, which will make us do less bone work and preservation of the facet and pedicles. Dural incision can be given vertically midline or the T-shaped dural incision along with the cutting of the dentate ligament, and excision of the lesion proper and excision of the involved dura, then finally duroplasty fixation if required. In this picture, it is separation of the dentate ligament standing from the opposite side, and the same corresponding line diagram has been shown. This is the anterior extent and posterior extent separation. So these are pictures. We are opening dura from cranial to caudal here, and we are opening till the upper pole and the lower pole have been identified from the lead, and devascularization has been done with bipolar laser, which will be done from caudal to cranial. Tumor decompression is also done from caudal to cranial, and we have excised the entire involved dura with laser or any cutting after bipolar cauterization. Separation of the dentate ligament and involved dura is completely excised, and the defect is closed here with a duragen of 1 into 1 inch. In our study of 29 cases, male to female preponderance is 1:1.4, with 41% of males and 58% of females. Coming to the age distribution, 22-year-old was the youngest and the oldest was 86-year-old. With a predominantly 50 to 60 year age group of 31% and 70 to 80 age group of 20%, followed by 60 to 70 of 17%. Coming to the location, dorsal spine predominantly was 62%, followed by cervical 17.2%, and other less than 10%. Coming to the histopathological variant, 48% of them were pseudomatous meningiomas, followed by meningothelial 24%, transitional 17%, and others were less than 10%. 19 patients about 1 to 2%, 2 to 5%, and 5 to 10%. We have operated 4 recurrent cases which were operated outside. Staying after 3 years, 6 years, 7 years, and 1 patient was operated twice earlier, 27 years ago and 4 years ago. Pre-op paresis and paresthesia improved in the post-operative. Morbidity, we noted temporary paraparesis and local infection which were treated. There was no recurrence in the study, and neoadjuvant therapy was given to 4 patients. No mortality. With a minimum follow-up of about 1 month to maximum of 7 years, we have noted patients coming back with paresthesias or low-grade pain and discomfort in the localized area. We have done serial imaging for the patients after 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and 4 years post-surgery. So this is the in comparison to the already surgical series of spinal meningiomas. In our study, we had 29 cases. The lowest was 33 and the largest was 174 in comparison to outside. And we had 97% of complete resection, which is on par with other series presented outside. Our morbidity was also in comparison to the other studies, and some it is less also. Mortality was 0 in our group, and we didn't have any recurrence noted in our group. It might be because of our short study population. Coming to the conclusion, contralateral approach reduces the bone work. It preserves the facet, pedicles, and avoids fixation. Laminoplasty can be done in cases preferably, if feasible. Tooth preservation is our primary goal in tumor removal, and dura need to be excised for a meningioma. Thank you.
Madam, nice presentation, madam. Hello, madam.
Yes,
Yeah. Subject is open for discussion. I have 2 more minutes. Madam, as per your study, pseudomonas is the most common.
Yes, sir.
Perhaps, madam. Did we come across any grade 2 or grade 3 meningiomas?
No, sir. All of them were grade 1, sir.
Yeah, probably. Okay, madam. And is there a need for radiotherapy post-operative? I mean, for any case?
We have sent for radiotherapy in patients where MIB index was more than 10. Patients. We have sent them for radiotherapy.
Madam, dural excision, how do you take this? If it is located anteriorly or anterolaterally? You told when you will exercise it.
There's any doubt,
We are
opening the dura. We are opening the dura at the site of the lesions, sir.
Yes,
so we are
madam.
opening till the upper pole, till we see the normal arachnoid thing and the lower pole also, sir. So that we are excising it curvilinearly on laterally, sir.
Madam, do you do duroplasty? I mean, you told
Duroplasty we're using Duragen here, sir.
Yeah, okay. When post-op CSF leaks and all.
Post-op CSF leak, we have no patient leak, sir, with Duragen.
But do you screen brain preoperatively?
Local infection was there in one. If we are putting Duragen, we are not putting any intrains.
Do you screen brain preoperatively for meningioma cases, spinal meningiomas?
Yes, sir. Screening of the brain is also done, sir.
For all the patients, or?
Yes, all the patients.
Yeah. A nice presentation, madam. Yeah. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Satya Naomi.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, madam. You can share your screen.
Okay. Good morning, sir. Good morning, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, audible. You can go ahead. You can share your screen, madam.
Sir, is it visible, sir?
Yeah. Please share your screen.
Sir, is it visible now, sir?
Madam, it is visible.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
The name is.
Madam, you have to share your presentation, madam.
Also, let me know. Then Raj. హీటర్లో ఎక్స్టెన్షన్ బోర్డులో రావాలి
చూస్తాము ఎందుకు రావు చూస్తాము ఇది పెద్దదానికి ఎక్కడ వస్తుంది.
Sir, is it visible now, sir?
Madam, it is visible. You need to share your screen with your presentation.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Please share your PPT, PowerPoint.
Yes, sir. Sir, is it visible now, sir?
Your PowerPoint is not visible.
ఏంటి ఇంకా 15 minutes 9:30 to 10:10 9:30 to 10:10 ఇప్పుడు 10:59
Yeah, madam. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Is it visible now, sir?
Yes, madam. It is visible.
Please go
Yes,
ahead.
sir.
Madam, please make it full screen
Yes, sir.
and you can start.
Okay, sir. Good morning, sir. Today my paper presentation is moderate to severe traumatic brain injury at our institutional experience at Guntur General Hospital. Introduction is traumatic brain injury is among the oldest and most common
Madam, make
medical
it full screen.
Yes, sir. Is it okay now, sir?
Below there is an icon.
Showing full screen. Madam. Madam. Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
nice. Please go.
Traumatic brain injury is among the oldest and most common medical afflictions affecting humankind. And it is the main cause of 1/3 to half of all trauma-related deaths. Their severity is graded into according to the Glasgow Coma Scale score. GCS between 13 to 15 is called mild TBI. GCS between 9 to 12 is moderate TBI, and GCS between 3 to 8 is severe TBI. Sir. Accurate prediction of long-term outcome after an emergency admission to hospital is useful as an aid to clinical decision making in patients with head injury. In 1991, Marshall et al. Proposed a CT scan classification of head injury to predict outcome. Similarly, in an attempt to predict and improve outcomes of TBI, multiple clinical trials have been designed all over the world, but most of them have failed. Impact scoring was proposed, that is International Mission for Prognosis and Analysis of Clinical Trials in TBI, with the purpose of advancing knowledge of prognosis, trial design, and treatment in traumatic brain injury. To date, Impact project has enabled validation of prognostic models and standardization of the data series, and provide evidence-based recommendation to improve the sensitivity and efficiency of clinical trials. Impact project have developed a simple tool to predict 6 months outcome in adults with moderate severe TBI. This tool includes 3 models of increasing complexity. One is impact core, including age, motor response, and pupillary reactivity. Impact extended core, hypoxia, hypotension, and CT findings according to Marshall CT classification, presence of SAH, and presence of epidural hematoma. And impact lab criteria include glucose and hemoglobin levels on admission. This tool provides an estimate of expected results at 6 months in terms of mortality and functional outcome. It is necessary to validate impact models in neurotrauma centers in order to ensure applicability. This is a picture showing Marshall et al. CT classification. They are graded into 6 categories. Class 1 is diffuse injury with no visible pathology and CT scan. Class 2 is diffuse injury with systems present with midline shift between 0 to 5 mm. Class 3 is diffuse injury with the systems compressed or absent with the midline shift 0 to 5 mm. Class 4 is midline shift is more than 5 mm. Class 5 is evacuated mass lesion. Class 6 is non-evacuated mass lesion with higher mixed density lesion more than 25 cc. Our aims and objectives are to evaluate and describe clinical characteristics of moderate to severe traumatic brain injury patients and to assess the outcome and validate the impact score. Materials and methods include, it's a prospective observational study conducted between July 2019 to September 2019, including 136 patients attending Department of Neurosurgery at Government General Hospital, Guntur. Inclusion criteria are all the patients with traumatic brain injury and GCS on presentation who have GCS of less than or equal to 12, and patients who presented early within 24 hours of injury. Exclusion criteria are patients who were brought dead to the hospital, patients with alcohol abuse, patients who presented late, and patients who are not admitted in ICU of neurosurgery department in view of other associated injuries. Results include Total number of cases of traumatic brain injury admitted during the study period of 3 months, that is from July 2019 to September 2019, was 302 patients. If the GCS less than or equal to 2 or 136 patients were taken into the study. Males accounted for 85% of the study group, and 15% were females, with male to female ratio of 5.8:1. Age of the patients was ranging from 14 years to 80 years, and the median age was 42.7. This is a picture showing age distribution of the patient. In this table, most of the productive age groups, 30 to 40 age group, they are mainly sustained head injuries. The most common modality of injury was RTA, and followed by fall from height, followed by assault. Most of the people, that is 55.9%, belong to severe TBI category with GCS 8 or less. Prognostic marker impact scoring was performed for all the patients, and the mean scores obtained were compared with our outcome. Most of the patients presented with Marshall's category 2 on admission CT. 54.4% had SAH, and 44.1% patient had EDH. This is the picture showing GCS at present admission. Less than 56% people have sustained severe traumatic brain injury, and 44% moderate TBI. 18 patients among the severe TBI had GCS of 3 and bilaterally non-reactive pupils, and the other had GCS 4 or 5 at the time of admission. The prognosis of such patients was dismal and has accounted for the high mortality. 40 patients of 136 cases required and underwent surgery. Most of the category for Marshall's category 4 people, the rest were managed conservatively, and 60% among the patients undergoing surgery recovered, and mortality was seen in 40%. The mortality rate among the moderate to severe TBI was 38.2% in our study during the 6 months follow-up. Among moderate TBI, mortality was 10%, which is significantly lower than the mortality seen in severe TBI group, where the mortality rate is 60%, and 88% of deaths belong to severe TBI group. These are the characteristics of the patients according to the impact score. This is the core showing age, motor response, and pupillary reactivity, and extended core containing hypoxia, hypotension. These are the CT classification, validation of CT classification, and lab glucose and hemoglobin. Most of the people, they have M5 motor response, and both non-reactive pupils are 90%, and hypoxia is seen in 48 people. Hypotension is in 22 people, and most of the people, they are categorized into CT grade 2 of say Marshall CT classification. So according to this impact score, average mortality rates at 6 months as calculated using impact model, using core model only, that is 32.2%. Core plus CT, it is 30.9%. Core plus CT plus lab, when considered, the mortality rate was 28.8%. Discussion. India is one of the countries with the highest number of TBIs in the world. The problem of TBI is underestimated due to the lack of research and good quality data in India. Males were 5.8 times more commonly affected than females in our study. The mean age group was 42.7 years, which is a productive age group, leading to huge losses and sufferings to the family. Compared to the study in North India by Vineet et al., where the mean age group was 32 years, our study had a older mean age group, 40.7 years. Low GCS, a Glasgow Coma score, and admission was significant risk factor for mortality. Mortality rate was 10% in our study for moderate traumatic brain injury group, which is less compared to 32% seen in Vineet et al. Study, which was conducted in North India.
Apart from the bony consistency, there was no other neurological disease or no other significant.
The mortality rate was very high in severe TBI group, which is comparable to the same study.
Radiological investigation, which is showing the lesion only in the extradural plane. The brain
Surgical intervention rate in our study was about 30%.
Shows the lesion.
Similar studies.
The lesion, the overlying bone was destroyed.
To conclude, most of the injuries in our study are due to road traffic accident, more common among the productive age group, and mostly in males. There was a very high rate of mortality, 38.2%, especially in the severe TBI group. Prognosis assessment by the impact model may not be very accurate for assessment in our population, but it gives an objective and standard tool for guidance and management. Knowledge about causes, patterns, and severity of the condition will help in decision making, management, and rehabilitation in developing countries. And these were my references, sir.
So, concluding slide, sir, I would like to tell that bony lesions of the scalp have a wide spectrum, ranging from benign conditions like meningiomas.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, sir.
Nice presentation, madam. Subject
Thank
is
you,
open
sir.
for discussion.
Frankly malignant lesions like secondaries in the skull from other unknown primaries or known primaries. Other studies have also comparison with other studies.
We conclude. Thank you, everyone, for all the participants.
This etc. But in this study, I have only included only bony swellings. So the other studies they usually included all consistencies of firm as well as bony swellings. This present study is only about the bony consistency.
And